Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to today's story, Raised by Fate. This is a heartfelt life drama about strength, love, and redemption. A journey from an orphan's struggle to the triumph of a devoted father. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Write in the comments which country or city you're joining us from. Your support means the world to this channel. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. I wish you a beautiful and emotional listening experience. He was 20 when the doors of the orphanage finally closed behind him. The cold morning air felt heavier than usual, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. He stood there for a moment, clutching the worn-out bag that carried everything he owned. 2 shirts, an old photo, and a pair of shoes that didn't quite fit. Behind him, the building that had been both his home and his prison for 18 long years looked smaller than ever. Ahead of him stretched the endless gray streets of the city. Unfamiliar, merciless, and alive with people who didn't know his name. His name was Daniel, and for the first time in his life he had no schedule, no caretaker, and no one to tell him what to do. Freedom felt both thrilling and terrifying. He had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that it had come, he realized how little he had to face the world with. No money, no diploma, no one waiting for him. Just a quiet determination that he would never go back. He walked for hours that morning, following the sound of traffic, hoping it would lead him somewhere he could belong. His stomach growled with hunger. His hands ached from carrying the heavy bag, and every face that passed him seemed too busy, too proud, too sure of where they were going. He was invisible among them, just another forgotten soul from a place people preferred not to think about. By evening, Daniel found himself standing near a construction site. The clanging of metal and the shouts of workers filled the air. He watched as men in dusty helmets lifted heavy bricks, pushed wheelbarrows, and joked with each other. It was hard work, but it was real. It was something he could do. Without thinking twice, he approached the gate. "Hey," he said to the guard. "Are you hiring?" The guard looked him up and down. "Got experience?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but I can work." Something in his voice must have sounded sincere, because the guard shrugged and waved him inside. "Talk to the foreman. Maybe he'll give you a chance." That was how Daniel's new life began. Among noise, dust, and endless labor, the foreman gave him a shovel and pointed at a pile of gravel. "Move it," he said simply. And Daniel did. Hour after hour. His hands blistered, his shoulders burned, and his back screamed for rest, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Every shovel of gravel was a step away from his past. When night came, he didn't have a place to sleep. He found an abandoned shed behind the site, spread his jacket on the cold floor, and lay there staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he understood what loneliness truly meant. The silence was deafening, but he whispered to himself, "I'll make it." It was the same sentence he would repeat for years to come. Days turned into weeks. The other workers began to notice him. The quiet young man who never complained, who showed up first and left last. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was always with respect. They called him Kid, but they also started sharing their lunch with him, offering advice, even joking around. Slowly, Daniel found a kind of family among them. Not by blood, but by sweat and effort. He saved every coin he earned, sleeping in the shed, washing his clothes in cold water from a broken pipe, and eating bread with canned beans. Sometimes he dreamed of having a bed. Sometimes he dreamed of hearing someone say, "I'm proud of you." But mostly, he dreamed of a future where he wouldn't have to fight for survival every single day. Then came the rain season. The work became harder, the ground slippery and dangerous. One afternoon, a stack of metal rods began to fall, and Daniel jumped in to push another worker out of the way. The rods hit the ground just inches from his foot. The foreman saw it all. That evening, he called Daniel over. "You've got guts, kid. the man said, lighting a cigarette. You work harder than most men here. Keep it up. It wasn't much, but those words felt like gold. Daniel nodded silently, trying not to show how much it meant. From that day, the foreman started trusting him more, giving him better tasks, asking for his help to organize others. The workers followed his lead naturally. He didn't boss them around. He worked beside them. Months passed. The paycheck grew. One evening, Daniel walked through the city, holding his pay envelope tightly. He stopped at a small food stall and bought a hot meal for the first time in months. The taste of real food brought tears to his eyes. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, as if he was eating his own victory. Eventually, he found a tiny apartment. One room with peeling paint, a single window, and a bed that squeaked when he sat on it. But it was his. His first home. No rules, no curfew, no supervisors. Just Daniel and silence. He sat on the floor that night, looking around, and whispered again, I made it. Life began to change, slowly but surely. He bought second-hand clothes, fixed his shoes, even managed to buy a used phone. On weekends, he explored the city, watching people who seemed to live so easily. Families, couples, friends laughing in cafes. Sometimes it hurt to watch them. Sometimes it gave him strength. Because he knew he wanted that kind of life someday. Not just survival, something more. A year later, the company promoted him. The foreman had retired, and Daniel was chosen to lead the team. The boy from the orphanage was now a brigadier, managing men twice his age. The same workers who once called him kid now looked at him with respect. His paycheck doubled, and for the first time he felt the warmth of stability. He even bought an old car, a beat-up model that sputtered and coughed but still ran. Driving it through the city made him feel unstoppable. At night, he would sometimes drive past the orphanage. The lights were dim, and the same iron gate stood there, cold and distant. He never went inside. He just sat in his car, remembering the boy he used to be, and silently promised never to forget him. But as the months went by, Daniel began to realize something. Hard work could build a home and fill a wallet, but it couldn't fill the emptiness inside. He had money now, comfort, even respect. But when he came home, it was always quiet. No laughter. No voice waiting to ask how his day was. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. He wanted more from life. Not wealth, connection. That desire, quiet and growing, was what pushed him to search for a new path. A path that would take him out of the dust of construction and into a world he had never known before. A world of offices, computers, and clean shirts. A world where, without knowing it, he would meet the person who would change his life forever. The sound of hammers and drills had become the rhythm of Daniel's life. Years passed, and with each sunrise he grew stronger, more confident, more certain that he could shape his destiny with his own hands. The boy who once stood lost at the gates of the orphanage had turned into a man people relied on. He no longer feared the mornings. He owned them. As the brigadier of the construction team, Daniel had a new kind of pressure, responsibility. The men looked to him for guidance. Mistakes were his to fix, conflicts his to solve. It wasn't easy, but he thrived on it. He liked the way people respected him, how his words began to matter. He was learning that leadership wasn't about power, it was about trust. The company was growing, and so was Daniel's reputation. Clients often requested his team because they finished jobs early and without problems. Supervisors noticed. Sometimes, Daniel would be invited into meetings, not as a worker, but as someone whose opinion counted. He listened carefully, said little, and absorbed everything. There was so much he didn't know, but he was determined to learn. His small apartment started to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. He painted the walls himself, fixed the leaking pipes, even bought a table where he could eat like a proper man. A small shelf by the window held a few books he had picked up from a market. Books about building, about business, about life. At night, after long days of work, he would sit by that window and read until sleep overtook him. He didn't have a degree, but he had discipline. And discipline could move mountains. One Friday evening, after work, one of the older workers patted him on the shoulder and said, "You've come a long way, kid. You should be proud." Daniel smiled quietly. Pride wasn't something he felt often. It always came with a hint of guilt, as if being proud meant he might forget where he came from. But deep down, he knew he had earned every step of this journey. Months turned into years. The city kept changing, and so did Daniel. He saved enough money to buy a better car. Nothing fancy, but it didn't break down every other week. He learned to wear clean shirts, to speak with confidence, to look people in the eyes. There was something magnetic about his calm presence. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. One day, during a safety inspection, Daniel was introduced to the regional manager of the company, a tall, serious man named Mr. Lane. They spoke briefly about efficiency, materials, and deadlines. Mr. Lane was impressed. "You ever thought of moving into management?" he asked. Daniel hesitated. "I don't have a degree." "Degrees matter less than dedication," Mr. Lane said. "You've got something most people don't. Work ethic. Integrity." Those words stayed with him. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The idea of leaving construction, of stepping into an office, into a new life, terrified him, but it also lit something inside him. He wanted to grow. He wanted to prove that a boy from an orphanage could climb higher than anyone expected. Over the next few months, he started taking online courses at night. It was hard. His English wasn't perfect, and the world of business was foreign to him. But he refused to quit. He learned about management, planning, budgeting. Slowly, the chaos of numbers began to make sense. When a position opened at the company's headquarters, Daniel applied. It was a bold move. The interview was intimidating. Men in suits, polished shoes, polite smiles. He wore his best shirt, the one he ironed himself that morning, and sat upright, answering every question honestly. He didn't pretend to be more than he was. He just told them what he knew. How to work hard, how to lead, how to earn respect. 2 weeks later, he got the call. He had the job. It wasn't high up, just a junior coordinator role, but it was enough. He would no longer carry bricks. He would help organize the people who did. The first day he walked into the office, everything felt strange. The air smelled of coffee and paper. The walls were bright white, and people spoke softly, their fingers tapping keyboards like raindrops. He felt out of place at first, like a laborer who had wandered into a different world. But Daniel had faced worse. He observed, learned, adapted. Every task was done with the same precision he had brought to the construction site. Within weeks, people noticed him. The quiet man who never complained, who always got things done. And that was when he met Elena. She was older, elegant, always composed. Her presence filled a room like sunlight after rain. She was 10 years his senior, with calm eyes and a gentle smile that carried both warmth and sadness. She worked in management, coordinating multiple teams. Everyone respected her. She had a way of speaking that made even the most nervous employee feel understood. Their first conversation was purely work-related. She came to his desk to ask about a report, and Daniel, nervous, handed her the papers with slightly trembling hands. She noticed the calluses on his fingers, marks of years spent in hard labor, and smiled softly. "You used to work on site, didn't you?" He nodded. "Yes. For several years." "I can tell," she said. "You have the look of someone who's built things with his hands. That's rare around here." It was a simple remark, but it stayed with him. Over time, they began to talk more about work, life, coffee, even books. Elena was divorced, with a young son who lived with her part-time. She never hid it, but she also didn't talk about it much. Daniel never judged. He just listened. And that made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Seen. For Daniel, she became the first person in a long time who looked at him not as a worker, not as a survivor, but as a man. There was intelligence in her eyes, but also softness. They laughed sometimes, shared coffee breaks, even walked to the train station together after work. It wasn't love yet. It was understanding. Two people from different worlds finding peace in each other's company. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's confidence grew. He took on more responsibilities, stayed late to finish projects, and impressed the executives with his precision and honesty. Mr. Lane called him into his office one afternoon. "You're doing good work, Daniel. Keep this up, and you'll go far." Daniel nodded, trying not to show how much that meant. Compliments still felt foreign, like borrowed clothes, but he was learning to accept them. At home, his apartment began to change. The walls were brighter, the furniture newer. He even bought a small plant that sat by the window, a little symbol of life, something green to remind him how far he had come. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would make himself coffee, open the window, and watch the city lights flicker. Somewhere in that glow, he felt the pulse of his own future. Elena started visiting him after work. At first, it was for project discussions, but those discussions often turned into long conversations about childhood, dreams, and regrets. She told him about her failed marriage, about the loneliness that lingered even in success. He told her about the orphanage, about the nights when he used to fall asleep hungry and hopeless. There were no secrets between them. Their friendship deepened. She admired his strength. He admired her grace. Together, they found balance. Then one evening, after a long workday, Daniel offered to walk her home. The streets were quiet, the sky turning purple with dusk. They stopped by a bridge overlooking the river, and for a moment, neither spoke. The water below reflected the city lights, shimmering like broken dreams trying to heal. Elena looked at him and smiled. "You've come so far," she said softly. "You should be proud." He looked away, then back at her. "Maybe I just got lucky." "No," she whispered. "You worked for it." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a current neither could deny. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate. It was the quiet recognition of two lonely hearts finding warmth. That night, when Daniel returned home, he couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, his heart beat not just for survival, but for someone else. He didn't know what the future would bring, but one thing was certain. His life was no longer the same. The orphan who once slept in an abandoned shed was now standing on the edge of something new. Something fragile, beautiful, and terrifying. The days that followed felt different, though nothing had been said aloud. Daniel and Elena still spoke like colleagues, still exchanged polite smiles in the office, but beneath every glance and every silence was an invisible connection neither could ignore. It wasn't the kind of passion that burned fast and wild. It was something quieter, deeper, something that grew in the spaces between their words. Elena began inviting him to lunch more often. Sometimes they sat in the park near the office, sharing sandwiches and stories about their day. She talked about her son, Liam, who was 10, full of energy and loved to draw. Daniel listened with genuine warmth. He had never known what it meant to have a family, but in those moments, watching her speak with that soft motherly pride, he imagined what it might feel like to belong to one. He started helping her after work, fixing small things in her office, carrying files, walking her to the station. She often teased him about being too serious, but there was affection in her tone. And one evening, when she laughed at something he said, a real, unguarded laugh, he realized how much he wanted to protect that sound, to keep it in his life. Time passed, and their bond deepened. One rainy evening, after a long meeting, Elena offered him a ride home. The sound of rain on the car windows filled the silence between them. As they stopped at a red light, She looked at him and said softly, "You remind me of who I used to be before life got complicated." He turned to her, surprised. "And who was that?" "Someone who believed in good things," she said almost to herself. "Someone who still hoped." The light turned green, but neither of them moved for a few seconds. That night, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about her words. Maybe, just maybe, they were both what the other had been searching for all along. A few weeks later, she invited him to her apartment for dinner. It was a simple meal, pasta, salad, wine, but to Daniel it felt like a feast. Her home was warm and full of life, with small drawings on the fridge and books stacked on every shelf. Liam was staying with his father that night, and the quietness of the apartment made everything feel intimate, fragile. They talked for hours, about the orphanage, about love, about loss. When the clock struck midnight, neither wanted the evening to end. Elena walked him to the door. The city lights shimmered outside, reflecting softly in her eyes. There was a pause, a long, electric silence. Then, she leaned forward and kissed him gently, as if testing whether he would pull away. He didn't. The kiss deepened, slow and real, the kind that changes everything without a single word spoken. That night marked the beginning of their life together. From that day, they were inseparable. They still worked together, but outside the office, they were something more. Partners, companions, two souls finding comfort in each other's broken places. Daniel began spending weekends at her place. He helped with the groceries, cooked breakfast, played with Liam when he was around. The boy took a liking to him quickly, always asking him to fix toys or tell stories about when you were small. Daniel never told him that his own childhood had no stories worth telling, only silence and empty halls. Instead, he made up gentle tales about brave boys who built their own castles. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt complete. He woke up to the sound of laughter, the smell of coffee, the warmth of another person beside him. The emptiness that had followed him for years was gone. He didn't feel like the orphan anymore. He felt like a man who had finally built a home. Elena was different from anyone he had ever known. She was strong but kind, practical but full of quiet dreams. She encouraged him to continue studying, to grow, to aim higher. "You're meant for more," she often said. "Don't let your past define your future." And he believed her. He enrolled in evening management classes, determined to build the kind of life that would make her proud. She helped him with his essays, corrected his grammar, laughed when he fell asleep over his books. Together, they became a small team, pushing each other forward, healing what life had once broken. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching the sunset from her balcony, Daniel took her hand. "You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have," he said quietly. "A home. A reason." She smiled. "You gave it to yourself. I just helped you see it." He hesitated, then looked at her with a kind of determination that came from deep within. "Elena," he said softly, "move in with me. Let's start something together. Just us." She was silent for a long moment, looking out at the fading light. "You're sure?" she asked. "I'm not young, Daniel. I'm not like the girls your age. I have responsibilities and a past." "I don't care about that," he said. "All I see is you." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of a quiet gratitude. She nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "Let's do it." They moved in together 2 weeks later. Daniel's small apartment became their shared world. They painted the walls together, bought new curtains, and laughed over how much space they didn't have. But none of that mattered. Happiness lived in the smallest moments. The mornings when he woke up to find her hair resting on his chest. The evenings when they danced in the kitchen with music only they could hear. At work, people noticed their closeness but said nothing. They were discreet, professional. Daniel's performance only improved. His reports were precise, his leadership respected, his name beginning to circulate in higher offices. It seemed that every part of his life was finally falling into place. Elena's son Liam grew fond of Daniel. When he visited, he would run to him shouting, "Daniel, look what I drew." Daniel would smile and hang the drawings on the fridge. For the first time, the apartment felt alive, not just with love but with family. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Daniel would look at Elena sleeping beside him and wonder how someone like him, an orphan, a boy with nothing, had found all this. He was afraid to even breathe too loudly, afraid it might disappear like a dream. But life, as he would soon learn, has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. The first sign came in whispers, small things easily ignored. A late-night message on Elena's phone she didn't explain. A look of worry she tried to hide. Phone calls she took in another room. Daniel told himself not to overthink it. She had a life before him, responsibilities, maybe even unresolved issues with her ex-husband. He wanted to trust her. He loved her too much not to. Still, something inside him began to ache, a quiet fear he couldn't name. But he pushed it aside, convincing himself that love, real love, was built on faith. And he had waited too long, fought too hard, to lose it now. The days continued as usual, but the air between them had changed. She smiled less, touched him less. Sometimes she came home late and avoided eye contact. Daniel tried to pretend everything was fine, but every silence felt heavier, every unanswered question sharper. One evening, he found her sitting on the balcony, staring at the city lights. "Elena," he said softly, "is something wrong?" She looked at him for a long moment, then forced a small smile. "No, I'm just tired." But Daniel knew. Something was slipping away. Something precious. He reached for her hand, but she gently pulled it back. "Let's not talk tonight," she whispered. "Please." He nodded, though his heart felt like it was breaking. That night, as she slept beside him, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. The rain tapped against the window like quiet warning knocks. He had built this life with his own hands, brick by brick. He couldn't lose it now. But deep down, he knew that the walls of love are the hardest to rebuild once they start to crack. The truth often comes quietly, like a shadow slipping beneath the door. It doesn't shout, it doesn't warn. It simply arrives, and nothing is ever the same again. For Daniel, it came one afternoon. He had left work early, carrying flowers, planning to surprise Elena. It had been weeks since he'd seen her truly smile, and he wanted to remind her that no matter how heavy life became, they still had each other. The elevator to their apartment seemed to move painfully slow, each floor echoing with the sound of his heartbeat. When he reached the door, he heard voices. Her voice. And another, a man's. Calm, familiar, too close. Daniel froze, his hand on the doorknob. He didn't burst in, he listened. "Elena, we need to stop meeting like this," the man said. His tone carried a strange blend of guilt and longing. "I know," Elena replied, her voice breaking. "It's just, I can't explain it. I didn't mean for things to go this far." Silence followed, then the sound of quiet sobbing. Daniel stepped back from the door, the flower still in his hand. His chest felt hollow, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and denial. He wanted to open the door, to see, to confront, but something inside him refused. Instead, he walked away, down the hallway, out into the cold evening air. The city lights blurred before his eyes as he walked aimlessly. His mind refused to form a single thought. Betrayal wasn't new to him. Life had betrayed him many times, but this was different. This was someone he had let into the deepest part of himself. Someone he had trusted with the fragile pieces of his soul. That night, Elena came home to find the flowers on the table. The petals had already begun to wilt. She called his name, but the apartment remained silent. He didn't come home for 3 days. When he finally did, she was waiting for him. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. "Daniel," she began. "I can explain." He cut her off, his voice quiet but sharp. "Don't. I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. He looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable. "Then why did you?" Tears fell down her cheeks. "It was a mistake. I thought I'd moved on, but when my ex came back for Liam's school meetings, we started talking again. It confused me. I didn't plan for it. I didn't even know what I was doing until I heard you," Daniel finished for her. She closed her eyes, shame flooding her expression. "Please don't hate me." He didn't answer. He walked past her, into their bedroom, where everything smelled of her perfume and memories he wished he could erase. Elena followed him, desperate. "Daniel, please. I was lost. I don't want him. I want you. You're the one who gave me peace, who made me feel alive again." He turned to her, pain etched across his face. "Peace doesn't come from lies, Elena. And you can't build love on top of betrayal." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "I'm done," he said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." The words hung in the air like a final breath. He left that night with nothing but a small bag and his car keys. The apartment that once felt like home was now a stranger's house. He didn't look back. Days turned into weeks. The silence between them grew heavier. She tried to call, to text, to explain again, but he never answered. The pain was too deep, too raw. He buried himself in work, staying late at the office, sleeping in the car, trying to forget the way her laughter once filled the air. Meanwhile, Elena's world began to crumble. Her ex had moved on, uninterested in rekindling anything. She had lost Daniel's trust, and with it, her sense of stability. The apartment felt empty without him. Every corner a reminder of what she had destroyed. Then came the morning she realized she was late. Days turned into anxious weeks. The test confirmed it. Pregnant. Her hands shook as she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small plastic stick that would change everything. Daniel's child. The man she had betrayed. The man who now wanted nothing to do with her. She cried until her eyes burned. Part of her wanted to call him immediately, but what could she say? That she was carrying his child after cheating on him? He'd never believe her. Maybe he shouldn't. Still, she tried. When Daniel finally agreed to meet, it was in a small cafe far from their old apartment. He sat across from her, his face pale, tired, guarded. "What do you want, Elena?" he asked coldly. She looked down, then met his eyes. "I'm pregnant." He didn't react. For a moment, it was as if he hadn't heard her. Then his jaw tightened. "Is it mine?" Her lips trembled. "Yes, Daniel. I swear." He leaned back, bitterness in his eyes. "You expect me to believe that? After everything?" "It's true," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I made a terrible mistake, but the baby is yours. Please believe me." But he couldn't. Or maybe he refused to. He stood up, shaking his head. "I can't do this again." "Daniel, please," she whispered. "Don't walk away. Not this time." But he did. Just like before. He turned and left her sitting there, alone with her tears and her unborn child. Weeks passed. Elena's body grew weaker. Stress and guilt consumed her. She stopped going to work, stopped answering calls. Her health began to decline. She was diagnosed with a severe illness, a condition that would only worsen with time. She didn't tell anyone, not even Daniel. She knew he wouldn't come. She didn't want pity. But when the baby was born, everything changed. She held the tiny boy in her arms, his eyes half open, his tiny fingers wrapping around hers. He looked so much like Daniel that she couldn't stop crying. For the first time in months, she felt something pure, hope. She named him Ethan, after Daniel's middle name. It was her way of saying sorry, of keeping him close even when he was far away. As the weeks passed, her condition worsened. Every breath was harder than the last. She knew she wouldn't have much time, so she called him one final time. "Daniel," she said weakly when he answered. "Please come. It's about the baby." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "Elena, I told you. Please," she whispered. "Just this once. I don't have much time." Something in her voice made him stop arguing. That same evening, he arrived at her small apartment. She was pale, frail, a shadow of the woman he once loved. In her arms, a small child slept peacefully. "This is him," she said, her voice trembling. "Your son." Daniel stared at the baby, his heart caught between disbelief and something he didn't want to name. "Elena," he began, "why are you doing this?" "Because you need to know the truth," she said. "He's yours." "I was wrong, Daniel. I lost everything that mattered, but this little one, he's a part of you. Please take him when I'm gone. Give him the life I couldn't." He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "Don't talk like that. You'll get better." But she only smiled faintly. "No, Daniel. My time's running out. Promise me you'll take care of him. Promise me you won't let him grow up feeling unloved like you did." His throat closed. He wanted to argue, to deny it, but the look in her eyes silenced him. He nodded slowly. "I promise." She reached out and touched his face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything." He held her hand as she drifted to sleep for the last time. When morning came, she was gone. The funeral was small. Only a few co-workers attended. Daniel stood in silence, holding Ethan in his arms, unable to stop the tears that finally came. Later, he took the baby for a DNA test. The results confirmed what his heart already knew. Ethan was his son. As he held the child close, Daniel felt a strange mixture of sorrow and purpose. He had lost the woman he loved, but he had been given something far greater, a reason to live. From that day on, everything changed. The pain didn't disappear, but it became fuel. Daniel worked harder than ever. Every late night, every sacrifice, every success was now for Ethan. He built a life for his son, a life of safety, dignity, and opportunity. He didn't date again. He didn't need to. His love had taken a new form. It cried in the night, smiled in the morning, and called him Dad for the first time 3 years later. And when he heard that word, something inside him finally healed. The morning after the funeral, Daniel stood by the window of his small apartment, holding Ethan in his arms. The world outside went on as if nothing had happened. People hurrying to work, cars honking, children laughing on their way to school. But inside, everything had changed. He was no longer the boy from the orphanage. No longer the young man chasing success to prove something to the world. Now he was a father. And for the first time in his life, he had someone who depended on him completely. The early days were the hardest. Ethan cried through the nights, and Daniel had no idea what to do. He made mistakes, burned bottles, sleepless nights, forgotten meals, but he learned. He learned to change diapers, to mix formula, to sing quietly in the dark until the baby stopped crying. He learned what love meant. Not the kind that promises eternity and breaks it, but the kind that endures through exhaustion, loneliness, and fear. Years passed like pages turning in a book. Ethan grew quickly. Curious eyes, the same stubborn chin as his father, the same quiet strength. Daniel took any job he could find. Construction, delivery, warehouse work. Whatever paid the bills. But he never complained. He saved every coin, every paycheck. He wanted Ethan to have what he never did. A childhood with warmth, security, and dreams. When Ethan turned 5, Daniel had already started his own small renovation team. It began with 3 workers from his old construction days. They trusted him, remembered how hard he had worked when no one else would. Slowly, the business grew. They started getting bigger projects, homes, offices, even city contracts. Daniel treated his workers like family. He paid them fairly, never raised his voice, and worked alongside them when times got tough. The same boss who once gave him his first chance came to see him one day. "You've done well for yourself," he said proudly. "Didn't think I'd see the day when that quiet orphan would run his own company." Daniel only smiled. "I had to," he replied. "For him." He looked at Ethan, playing nearby with a toy truck, and felt a warmth that words could never capture. As the years passed, Daniel's company expanded. He invested in property, learned management, took evening classes in business. The same boy who once had nothing was now signing contracts worth millions. But through it all, he never changed. He still wore simple clothes, still drove his old car, still walked his son to school whenever he could. People called him Mr. Walker now. They respected him, admired his success. But he never forgot where he came from. The cold dormitory of the orphanage, the nights without food, the dreams whispered to a cracked ceiling. Those memories kept him grounded. Ethan grew into a bright teenager. He loved books, computers, and soccer. He had his mother's eyes and his father's resilience. One evening, after a school event, Ethan asked a question that froze Daniel's heart. "Dad," he said quietly, "where's Mom?" Daniel paused. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind for years, but the words still felt heavy. "She was a good person," he said softly. "She made mistakes, like we all do. But she loved you very much." "Is she gone?" Ethan asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes. But she's still with us, in a way. Every time you smile, I see her." The boy looked down, then hugged him tightly. "I miss her," he whispered. Daniel closed his eyes. "I do too, son." That night, he stood by the window again, just as he had years before, and looked at the stars. He whispered a quiet promise to the woman who had once changed his life. "I'll raise him right. I'll give him everything you couldn't. I'll make sure he never feels alone." And he did. Over the next decade, Daniel built not just a business but a legacy. He started a foundation for orphans, children like him, providing scholarships, housing, and mentorship programs. He visited those homes often, sitting with the kids, telling them his story. He wanted them to know that pain could become purpose, that no beginning was too small to lead to greatness. Reporters wrote articles about him, calling him the man who built hope. But fame didn't interest him. He stayed humble, quiet, focused. At home, Ethan became his greatest joy and pride. When Ethan graduated from university with honors, Daniel cried openly for the first time in years. "Your mother would be proud," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you, Dad," Ethan replied, "for everything." But Daniel shook his head. "You gave my life meaning. I should be thanking you." As Ethan began his own career, Daniel finally allowed himself to rest. His hair had turned gray, his hands rough from years of work, but his eyes still carried the same determined light. Sometimes on quiet evenings he would sit on the porch of his house, the one he had dreamed of as a boy, and think about the path that brought him there. From the cold corridors of the orphanage to the warmth of a home filled with laughter. From heartbreak to healing. From being forgotten to being someone's entire world. He never remarried. He didn't need to. Love, he realized, wasn't something you chased. It was something you built, brick by brick, moment by moment, through sacrifice and faith. One winter morning, as the first snow fell outside, Daniel stood by the window once again. Ethan was home for the holidays, asleep in his old room. The world was quiet, peaceful. Daniel smiled faintly. "I made it," he whispered to himself. "I kept my promise." He walked over to the old photo of Elena on the shelf, her smile frozen in time, holding baby Ethan. "He's everything we dreamed of," Daniel said softly. "And I'm okay now." As the light of dawn filled the room, he felt something lift inside him. Not sadness, not regret, just peace. Life had taken everything from him once, But it had also given it all back in a different form. He had found love in fatherhood, purpose in pain, and redemption in forgiveness. And in the end, that was enough.